glad to know you're still with us. Reactions have continued to mount following the restatement of a 5% tax on all fossil fuel sales under Nigeria's Harmonized Tax laws. While the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee has clarified that the levy is not new, concerns persist over its impact on consumers' wallets, the government's capacity to manage the process responsibly, and the country's preparedness to transition toward cleaner renewable energy sources. Joining me for more on this, I have Kenneth Erikume, Partner, Tax Reporting and Strategy, PwC. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Right. We understand there is a clarification about, this not being new, but I would like you to, I would like us to go over it again. Why has it become necessary to add it to the harmonized tax? And while it was under FERMA, what did it really do for us?
Right. Thank you very much. So first of all, including it in the Nigerian Tax Act was important to set up a framework for future taxation of petroleum products. So the concept there is that for petroleum products and products generally, there has to be one form of consumption tax or the other. So currently we pay taxes on clothing, we pay VAT on clothing, we pay VAT on services and things like that. But because we are an oil-producing country, historically, we haven't had to pay taxes on petroleum products. We had a subsidy, which then therefore meant that government had to regulate the prices of both diesel and PMS. At some point, diesel was deregulated, and now we have also come to the point where we have also removed subsidy on PMS. Subsidies and taxation are two sides of the same coin. Because when government subsidizes a product, it has to use revenue from elsewhere to deal with the cost of that item. When you take out subsidy, it frees up more government revenue. And at some point, taxation then comes in, which means government begins to collect more on that product. So what they've tried to do is not to begin to implement immediately. They've just set up a framework for the minister to, in the future, if it becomes necessary, to implement
Are those the words surcharge of the minister? Because what I do know is that the chairman of the committee told us that, it's something that would get to happen. But of course, it's left to the minister and it will be gazetted and all of that. But how do we know when this is going to happen? What are the preconditions that should be met before this will happen? And earlier, you talked about subsidy. And for many Nigerians, they have asked, what exactly have we, gained as a result of this subsidy removal? What exactly can we say? I mean, what exactly can we point to say this is what subsidy removal has fetched us or has earned us as a people?
Brilliant. Two very important questions. So you can't really legislate the actions of the minister. But one thing is clear, before the minister would come up with a regulation to implement the 5% surcharge, there has to be engagement with various stakeholders.
Including the everyday Nigerian?
Well, I believe with including the everyday Nigerian. But how do you get representation for the everyday Nigerian?
So you see NLC, the market women?
Well, yeah, so there could be pressure groups that they could engage to have a view on the impact of such a tax. So they could bring them on the to the table and have a proper conversation, and the industry players as well. And I get a sense of the sentiment of the industry players, that they are more positive around the framework which the government has done in this regard. The FERMA, the FERMA Act, it was as far back as 2007. It had challenges in terms of implementation. There were worries around the mode of implementation because FERMA is not really a taxation authority, and whether they would, implement the tax at different levels, which would cause cascading of cost. Because if you do that at the import, so if it's, imported petroleum products, you charge 5%, you charge 5% at the tank farm, you charge 5% at distribution, and up to the retail point, which someone who's not a taxation authority could do, then that would create a bigger problem.
So if I get you correctly, FERMA couldn't implement that. Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
FERMA couldn't implement, and there were worries around, how they would implement, right? And so for the industry, this is a much better outlook where
when you say the industry, I know that some persons have spoken against it, and they are saying that it's going to affect their ROI, it's going to affect them, it's going to push them out of business. So which people are you talking about?
Yeah, so I'm speaking about everybody in the industry. So yes, if you implement it immediately, what's going to happen, similar to when subsidy was removed, is that it will impact consumption, right? So the consumption of PMS has reduced significantly.
But where do you stand in all of this? I'd like to know. Where exactly
do I stand? I stand in the area of proper dialogue to reach consensus on how it should be implemented.
So you are in support of this surcharge? Is that what it means? You're just particular about timing?
No, I support a framework to tax all products. So you can't, so why would we have 0% tax on petroleum products, or tax clothing, or tax restaurants? For me, it's a question of a holistic look at what should be our tax policy around all of these things. So, at the moment, food prepared in restaurants are taxed at 7.5%, but there is no tax on any petroleum product whatsoever. Now, I'm not saying that, considering where we are coming from, I'm not saying that it should be implemented immediately. I think we need to look at the interest of every stakeholder, have a proper conversation, and be clear on what our policy direction should be. And if it is that we shouldn't tax petroleum products, that's fine. But, if I'm, in another industry, I would ask myself, why are we incentivizing petroleum products? And why are we not incentivizing maybe creatives, for example? So it has to be a robust conversation. And not limited. So for me, I think a framework to do that is important. The question of how and when is something that I believe dialogue should happen before we reach a consensus. So I don't know if that clearly represents my position, or whether you're convinced.
So it just tells me you're in support of it, but just like many Nigerians, you're looking at the timing also. So what are the preconditions you think we need to meet? Where do we need to get to before we can then talk about this? And then let's also look at the fact that we're told that this is meant to, ensure that, the roads are maintained and all of those things, and also that we can begin to plug into supporting renewable energies. Are we even there yet?
I don't think we're there. I think for me, the pressing issue is inflation. So clearly timing for me is wrong, right? Because some of the big pressures we have from an inflationary perspective includes food. And for food, you have to transport.
Exactly. You
also have energy, and then you have transportation. And all of these things have an element around petroleum products. So for me, I believe that the work that the central bank has done from a monetary perspective to try and deal with inflation could be rolled back if we do this thing at the wrong time. So we have to be very careful around timing and phasing. So we've seen economic reforms that are done big bang. They are never good for the economy. You don't want that sort of uncertainty and volatility. So things have to be done with clear structure, pre-communication, and phasing. So that's one. The other thing that I think is also important is to look at the utilization of revenue and funds from government. Okay. And you sort of alluded to this issue around, you've taken out the subsidy, FAC allocation has been at an all-time high.
Where's the impact?
What is the impact? And I think that's where fiscal responsibility and accountability has to come in. And for me, the most important one is the output of government. So other people would attack the issue around, the bloated budget of government, bloated, based on whose perspective. But for me, it is not about the cost of governance alone, but actually the quality of governance. You know, so for example, the quality of the public schools, the quality of healthcare, and just the general state of being a Nigerian.
But it appears not so much care is taken. I mean, those things are not really taken care of.
No, so it's certainly not. I mean, we are Nigerians, so we can speak freely. Our experience as Nigerians has been that, you know, government has never, even till today, the outlook of government has not been supportive, right? So, you know, if you drive out of the, you know, of your house, your encounter with policemen, is it positive? When you know, go to a public school, you know, many people are saying, okay, we can't send our kids to public schools, we want to send them to private schools at outrageous cost. So the contribution of tax, where's the benefit as Nigerians? So that has to be dealt with. And there has to be a method of accountability, because there's a lot of money going to the subnational right now. But usually the conversation always focuses on the federal government. But, you know, the subnationals, what are they doing with the revenues? So there needs to be more accountability at the state and local government levels as well.
You know, it's interesting because when you look at this particular committee, the committee is a presidential committee on, you know, policy, fiscal policy and tax reforms. We seem to be fixated on the tax reforms aspect, forgetting that there is the policy aspect. And I remember at that particular stakeholder meeting with media, they highlighted, you know, some of the things they would like to see, some constitution, whether it's constitutional review or some things around, you know, prudent management of resources and all of those things. I mean, these were things that are highlighted. When are they going to be implemented? Because we seem to be all about these taxes, forgetting that, I mean, they have to dual responsibility, fiscal policy on the one hand, and then tax reforms on the other hand.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Perpetua. But I think, to be fair, I understand the size of the challenge. It's not an easy thing to just deal with one paintbrush, right? Even just getting to this point with the tax reforms would have been a massive challenge. You know, not just in terms of the technical input into the reforms, but even the politics around the reforms, because there are different stakeholders. You remember the conversations around VAT and all the revenue and how it is being shared. Even some of the positions by the Governors Forum as well. All of that had to be dealt with. So, you know, it's not as straightforward. Don't you think the fiscal
policy should have come first?
It's a difficult one for me. I don't know if we
can just have that slide, you know, that picture on some of the recommendations of the committee. We have a picture on some of the recommendations of the committee. If we can have it on the screen, that would also help. Policy
drives taxation. So yes, I would obviously go with policy in advance. But Nigeria is not very straightforward, right? It's not a very it's not a country where you take a template that has worked in other jurisdictions and then you bring it and then you believe it's going to work. So things have to be rethought and done differently. But I agree with you. And some of the conversations we've had with government officials as well as the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Reforms indicates that they've had to do this thing, you know, from a modular perspective. So deal with one issue while there are some things that are going to be happening in the future. And many of those things are fiscal. Now, if you really want to address fiscal, you actually have to go to the Constitution. I tell people that one of the biggest problems, you know, we have as a country from a fiscal, not just fiscal, but even tax perspective, note that even the tax reforms that have happened have not really sufficiently dealt with the multiplicity of taxes that we have in Nigeria today. So they were only able to deal with federal taxes, but the big issue was never federal taxes. Of course, federal had the earmark taxes. You had education trust fund, you had police trust fund, you had all those things. Consolidating that, is a good thing, but that is not where the big challenge for businesses are. It's actually the state taxes and local government taxes that takes,
Haven't we gotten them to agree on all of this?
So you can bring them to the table and have a conversation, but you cannot take over the role of the State House of Assembly. So constitutionally, you have to be able to regulate what the states are able to legislate on, which means you need a framework to do that, or you need to break down the way the exclusive, concurrent, and residual list, how it is structured. And that is a very big job to do. And that's the only way you can actually bring fiscal responsibility at the state level. Now you can do it through suasion. If there are incentives or allocations that you can give, and then you ask for accountability in their use, similar to what some of the structures the World Bank has used in the past. To say, if you need funding at the subnational level, you need to show me what you have done in this area, that area, and so on. So it's a big job, and I don't think it should be underestimated at all. There's quite a lot to do, but I agree with you. This is just the tip of the iceberg, tax reforms, right? For some odd reason, it looks like a low-hanging fruit. The big elephant in the room is actually the fiscal policy. And that's going to be quite challenging because there's going to be a lot more political considerations and more widespread stakeholders that you need to manage in a conversation.
All right, I think we'll just go on a short break, and when we come back, we will continue. Stay with us. You're watching Business Edge. It's a pleasure to still have you. And of course, Kenneth is still right here with me. Thank you so much. Oh, but I asked you a question earlier, and that points to, I think I was looking at, is this even necessary? I mean, talking about this 5% surcharge, is it even necessary? And then the so-called, alternatives or renewable energy sources that we're trying to pivot to, are they really available in Nigeria and accessible?
Okay, so for the first part of the question, necessity is driven by economic conditions. In many other countries where they have taxes on petroleum products, during COVID, when there was a strain on the economy, they don't have subsidies, by the way, in many countries on petroleum products. What they did was they rolled back the taxes on some of those products just to alleviate the economic challenges that people faced during COVID. So that, so it is a fiscal mechanism to actually aid or tax citizens at a particular time. So that was the situation for those countries. Ours, we need to ask ourselves, is it necessary at this time? So you have to look at the economic conditions. I mentioned inflation. We want to get...
I'm saying, are we ready to pivot?
So pivoting to renewables,
yes.
For now, we don't have that investment at a large scale. What the government has tried to do is to incentivize renewables. So, for example, this 5% surcharge doesn't apply to renewables. If you're building out, renewable infrastructure, there is no VAT, and there are no import duties as well. In the National Tax Nigeria Tax Act as well, they've been included in the economic development incentive as well, so they could benefit from 5 to 10 years tax holiday. And that is all in the hope of attracting investment. But the way I see it is that those incentives will not be enough. Government has to actually invest massively in renewables as well. And if you see what happens in other developed countries or developing countries as well, in that area, government has to play an investment role, not just an enabling role in that space to actually make it work. So to answer your question, it's not readily available now. It's available at a very high cost. And to be honest, some of the reasons why people go for self-solution in the renewable space is because the public infrastructure in terms of getting electricity to homes is not at the level that you see in other countries. So, so 24 hours power is still a dream for many Nigerians. So they have to go do their own solar.
Not even 24 hours.
Not even Band-Aid. And the question around Band-Aid needs to also be spoken about in one of your...
Maybe some of the time we'll talk about it, especially looking at what's happening in Enugu, and Enugu saying that they've done their mathematics and they can say that they've covered costs before cutting, the tariff. But of course, the powers that be say no. All right. Kenneth Erikume, partner, tax reporting and strategy, PwC. Thank you for your time on the show today.
Thank you, Perpetua, for having me.
All right.